high navigation. And just a couple things I have to get out of the way first. Weirdly enough, we are under the Coast Guard's jurisdiction. Even though we don't have a motor and we're the only boat out here, we still have to abide by their rules. And they have this funny notion that we should return with the same amount of passengers. Imagine that. So the very first one is, this one's a pretty basic one, don't burn the boat down. We aren't allowed to have any smoking here on board or any open flames because we are a wooden boat. We have a canvas canopy, so any kind of flame that might burn us down is strictly prohibited. And the next rule is, this should be familiar to anyone who's been on an airplane. There's a few times where we're going to ask you to remain seated. And these are the obvious times when we have takeoff and when we have landing. And then also when we make our 2 turns. We're going to make 2 turns during our journey. I'll warn you when those times are. And we just ask you to remain seated because there may be a little bit of turbulence. Our boat is 50 feet long, and during our turns we're turning in a 60-foot wide canal, so occasionally we do bump the banks. So we just want you to be in a nice stable position while we make those turns, and also when we leave and come back to the dock. But other than that, you're welcome to have a walk around the boat during the journey. Just be advised that if you do go up to the edge, hold on to something that's solid, because the ropes, they've got a bit of give to them. If you were to completely lose your balance, they may not take your entire weight, and particularly for little ones, they can go through the ropes. So just hold on to something that's completely stable if you do go up to the edge. But other than that, you're welcome to have a wander around during the journey. And it looks like, I think they're just preparing to leave the paddock there. We are a mule-powered vessel here. The Josiah White 2 doesn't have any hidden motor other than the little generator that powers my sound system. So we don't have any motor in the back that's going to propel us down the canal. There's no hidden track like at Disney World. We are completely dependent on the mules for our locomotion here on the canal. So they are going to provide all of our power. But don't feel too bad for them. They have a relatively easy job to our mules. We weigh a measly 48 tons here on this boat. I know that sounds like a lot of weight, but we are on water. And with the magic of buoyancy and the lack of friction, there really isn't a heavy load for them to pull. And they can do it very, very easily. And we're nowhere near as heavy as the canal boats that we've been plying these waters, a century ago. They were heavily laden with coal, and they weighed about 120 tons. Now, those would have been a little bit hard for a team of mules to at least start moving, but once they got them going, they could just glide along. And here they come, our twin engines. If you do want to take a photograph of them, this is probably the best time, because for the rest of the journey, you're going to be getting their back end view. And we've got George in the front and Hank in the back. George is 12 years old, Hank in the back there is 15, and that's prime working years for a mule. Mules can easily live with modern veterinary practice and good health to be past 30. So these guys are probably in their young adulthood, and we expect to be using them here on the canal for at least another 10 years. So they're in the prime of their life.
Friends, you gotta be seated, please, because it's shut off time.
Yes, it's time for our takeoff. So yes, we ask that you be seated for this. And you'll see exactly how easy it is to move this boat in just a moment, because Steve and Sue are going to push us away from the dock. So measly 2 humans can manage to push this 48-ton boat. It's not that difficult. And there we are, we're off. attached to our boat with a tow line. And that's attached to the back of Hank there. He's got a tow bar that's connected to his harness. And in about half a minute, that line is going to get taut. And this is where they're going to have to work their hardest. They just have to get us moving in the right direction. They'll take a few stiff, big steps, and then they'll start walking comfortably. Here they go. And we're going to be cruising along at a very sedate 2 miles per hour. It doesn't sound very fast, and it isn't very fast, but it is a pace that a mule can keep very comfortably pulling a heavy load. And they can do that for a very long time, and they had to, because when this canal was open, it was open for 18 hours a day, from 4 in the morning until 10 p.m. at night. And during that open period, the mules would have to be pulling the boat pretty much continuously. They'd have a few breaks when they got to locks, but other than that, they were pulling for 18 hours a day. So they had to pull at a pace that was comfortable to them, and this is something that they can keep up for a very long time. You can tell that they're not working very hard. They're very slowly walking. When I'm out walking with the mules, I often feel that we would get beaten by a turtle. It seems so slow. But it was Benjamin Franklin he mathematically calculated how much weight 2 mules could pull on water. He did a lot of calculations about canals. He was very interested in their mechanics and how they worked. And he calculated that 2 mules could comfortably pull 130 tons on the water. And so we're well within that at 48 tons, and the heaviest boats that were plying these waters were 120, so within a good 10-ton buffer. And they can do that for a very long period of time, and particularly because they are mules and not horses. Horses are lovely animals, but they are not well suited to pulling on a canal. Now, does everybody know where a mule comes from? They don't just naturally occur. Yes, they're a crossbreed. They're a cross between a horse and a donkey. And it does matter who's the mother and who's the father. Now, I have mothers here today, don't I have mothers? Ladies, who do you think is the mother of those mules? Is it the horse or the donkey? You think about this, you'll get it right. The horse, yes, absolutely. It's the horse, because if you think about this, if you're a little donkey, do you want to give birth to a big animal like that that's going to be bigger than you? Absolutely not. No. The mother is the horse because she is the larger animal. She has the larger baby. And by combining the horse and the donkey, you get the best of both species. So, obviously from the horse, she gets the size and the strength. And that allows them to pull the heavy loads here on the canal. But the donkey, it gives those mule offspring a very important trait. It gives them intelligence. Now, we don't often think about donkeys as being intelligent, do we? When we see them depicted on television and cartoons, they're often, not behaving very well. They're sitting down, they're acting silly, they've got those big funny ears, they're braying, and, they're often not doing what they're told, but actually, they're very intelligent animals. Now we're just going to be making our first turn, so I'm going to have everybody be seated again. So donkeys are actually pretty intelligent, and particularly they've got a very strong self-preservation ethic. They're smart enough to know when to stop working, and this is where the term, stubborn as a mule comes in. I'm sure everybody's heard that, and probably some people have been described as stubborn as a mule. Yes, Steve back there certainly has. What's that? I already switched the rope.
Okay, sorry.
So yes, stubborn as a mule, but actually that's that donkey intelligence coming through, because a mule will know to stop working if there's a problem. If it is injured in some way, if it has something wrong with one of its hooves, or if there's something dangerous in the environment, or it's just too darn hot, they're going to stop working. And that's a good thing, because your mules on the canal are your most valuable asset, and you want them to be in good working order. So you want to be able to, preserve their lives and preserve their working ability. So having an animal that's smart enough to know when there's something wrong and who isn't going to do any further damage to himself is a very important trait. A horse, it doesn't have that. A horse wants to please you, and it's not smart enough to know to stop. And you can continue to work a horse beyond its point of endurance, and it can actually die that way. You can overwork a horse to death. The other thing is about horses and their sort of lack of intelligence is that they're known on hot days to want to take swims. We have this lovely inviting canal, and a horse that's feeling a bit hot and tired, and it might decide to take a swim in that canal. But it's not a good idea if you are harnessed up to a canal boat, and particularly if there's a lot of boat traffic going by, which there would have been. This is sort of the equivalent of having your dog run out onto the highway. It's very, very treacherous. So, if your horse goes into the canal, it very well may not come out alive. So that's a terrible thing. But these mules, they're smarter than that. They're very, very cautious. They don't like to be in places where they can't see where their feet are going. And George in the front there, he's so particular about water and stepping in water that he will go around puddles on the towpath. Even when they're only, a smidge, just tiny little puddle, he will walk around them. He's just too cautious. He doesn't know if it's going to slip out underneath of him. So he doesn't even want to touch a puddle. So that's an excellent trait. And then, of course, they can work for 18 hours a day. They know how to pace themselves. A horse, they're wonderful animals, they're wonderful to ride, but they'll wear themselves out pretty quickly. If you were to try to pull a canal boat with horses, you'd have to switch out the teams, probably every 4 to 5 hours. Now, you could probably manage a quicker pace than 2 miles per hour, but you'd be doing it in a very inefficient manner, and you'd have to be fairly wealthy to have multi-teams of horses to do that job. So mules were the preferred choice on this canal, and then that's what really were pulling all of the canal boats when this canal was open. But I guess we probably have to explain why we even have a canal, right? It's not something that naturally occurs in the environment. It's not like the Lehigh River that's nearby, that was formed over thousands of years with geological processes. This canal is man-made. Someone had to build it. They had to invest a lot of time and money and effort to put it here. And so there had to be a really excellent reason to do it. Well, it kind of all boils down to one word: coal. Back in the early 1800s, we were a brand new country. We declared our independence from Britain, but we weren't actually all that terribly independent. We didn't have a very developed society yet. We were very rural. We didn't have a lot of infrastructure, and we didn't have a lot of industry at that point. And we were kind of sitting ducks, for some of the other European powers. Not only were the British still around, but the French had some strongholds up in Canada. The Spanish were down to the south, and so we really needed to develop our country in order to maintain our independence. And that really came to a forefront in 1812. because the British decided they wanted us back. They initiated the War of 1812, at least that's what we call it here. And they'd gotten a little bit smarter this time around. They realized that they weren't going to conquer us by landing troops on our soil. They'd tried that before. They were just, our country was just too big and there was too many places for us to hide. So instead of landing troops, they decided that they were going to blockade our ports. And this was pretty smart because back then, across the land, roads were terrible, if there even were roads. So it was very difficult to move things across the land, so a lot of our trade between our colonies occurred along the eastern seaboard by ship. And by blockading all of our ports, they cut off all of this trade, and that particularly meant a lot because it cut off the coal that was coming up from the Virginias and the Carolinas. Now, Philadelphia at that time period was the biggest city in our country, and it was the center of a lot of our industry, particularly our ironworks. And ironworks are very greedy industries. They require a lot of fuel, and they weren't getting this coal that was coming up from the south. So they switched over to charcoal during the war. Because you have to keep making iron, you have to defend yourself, you have to make cannons and cannonballs, so iron was in high demand, yet they couldn't fuel it with the coal, so they switched over to using charcoal, and it was not the most efficient way of doing it. It takes about an acre of hardwood trees to make enough charcoal to make just 1 ton of iron. And it's hard to imagine today, because we're surrounded by trees, but they clear-cut all of the mature trees between here and Philadelphia. There really weren't a lot of trees left, and wood was a very precious commodity. And of course, it doesn't just grow back overnight either. So they were getting into a bit of an energy crisis. And if that war had lasted much longer, we may not be the independent country that we are today. But fortunately, the British got distracted. There was a gentleman named Napoleon over in Europe at that time, and he was causing a bit of a fuss. So the British withdrew their navy and returned to Europe to deal with that problem instead. So we dodged a bullet quite literally. But we knew we had a problem. The British could come back after they dealt with Napoleon. The Spanish or the French could decide we looked rather enticing. So we had to develop our country further. We had to get energy independence. We had to develop our internal infrastructure. And one way to do that was through canals. We're cruising along this canal here. It's nice and flat. There isn't much of a current. If you compare that with the Lehigh River, the Lehigh River is very, very shallow. It's rocky, it's fast. It's not a great way to move heavy loads, but a canal is. And they've discovered there's another kind of coal by this point. There's anthracite coal. It's a very hard form of coal. It comes from north of here. It used to be called Mock Chunk. Now we've renamed the town Jim Thorpe. But back then it was Mock Chunk, which means bare mountain in the Native American language. And that was pretty appropriate because it was mainly only bears who lived up there. It was wilderness. And so there's all this coal up there, but there's no way to get it down to Easton, down to Philadelphia, where they actually need it. And yeah, as I said, the roads were terrible. The Lehigh River's not that great. They did try to move coal down the Lehigh. There's a couple of gentlemen by the names of Josiah White and Erskine Hazard. Josiah, we've obviously named our boat after him, so he's important. They both were. They were iron masters down in Philadelphia. And they needed the coal from up north of here. And so they were trying to move the coal on rafts down the Lehigh River. because you can't have a nice boat like ours with a rudder in the back so you can steer. It's far too shallow. So they just had these rafts with crew members, with poles, and they sort of try to push off the worst of the rocks and get the raft where they need to go. But it was a dangerous enterprise, and a lot of those rafts never made it to their destinations. They ended up capsizing or dumping their loads. Some of the men lost their lives. It was not an easy way to move things. So Josiah and Erskine, they were very forward-thinking, and they could see beyond just their own iron industry. They invested in some of the coal mines up north of here. They bought them, and they wanted to have a canal that would link the Mock Chunk area to Easton, because by this time there were other canals being built. The state of Pennsylvania had started work on the Delaware Canal, which connects Easton to Philadelphia. And so it was recognized that canals were the way to go because they are just perfect for moving these heavy loads. But they're also rather expensive to build, and Pennsylvania had nearly gone bankrupt over building the Delaware Canal and some of the canals out west. So when Josiah and Erskine petitioned the Pennsylvania government to build one, they said, we recognize the need, but we don't have the cash. So they said to Josiah and Erskine, if you want to build the canal, we'll sweeten the deal for you. We'll give you the Lehigh River. We'll give you all of the land around the Lehigh. And if you can manage to build the canal in 10 years, it's completely yours, free and clear. Now, the Pennsylvania government, they thought that they had the good end of this deal, because they figured there's no way that these two guys who, they're into iron, they're not canal guys. There's no way that they're going to be able to build a canal in 10 years. So, they'll start on it, they'll fail, and the Lehigh River and the half-finished canal, they'll just revert to us, and we'll get the good end of this stick. They were wrong, because Josiah and Erskine, once again, they proved how smart and forward-thinking they were. Now, the first 5 years of their 10-year period, they didn't even move a shovel full of dirt. They spent that time planning and getting all of the money that they needed together so that they could complete the construction of the canal.